everyone. Please join me in welcoming writer-director Kitty Green, producer Scott Macaulay, and producer James Schamus for Q&A. They do have another event later tonight, another screening. So we are going to try to get an audience conversation as well, but I will start us off with a few questions. And first I want to say congratulations for this incredible film. So I've been thinking a lot about your methods, Kitty, in terms of creating the film and the use of interviews and the creation of composites. And so I was thinking about this in the context of anthropology and ethnography and the importance of capturing a feeling. And that's one of the things I think the film does so successfully, is capturing this layered sense of a feeling of knowing something. And I think you do that through the composite, but I think the composite is also really important in the context of the symbolism of the film, and that this is not just one assistant, not one chairman, not one wife or executive or HR person, but just an example of many. So I would like to ask you to reflect for us upon the choice to do composite characters, rather than say a singular character with a name and a set of very specific people.
Hi, thank you for being here, firstly. We're very happy to be here. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, a lot of the facts, in terms of, depending on, if you were to call it, the boss is sort of modeled on a few people, but the most obvious one being Harvey Weinstein. But a lot of the facts around his, particularly the assistants that work for him, are online already. You can read up about the medications and the stains on the couch and things like that. So I wasn't interested in really, when I was interviewing people, I was never really asking them about kind of those sort of details, but more, like you were saying, about their emotional kind of experience and what it was like, what it felt like to be kind of in a position of no power in a company like that and surrounding circumstances like that. So that became kind of the focus. And I must say, I interviewed I started with 10 people from the Weinstein, maybe 20, 30 people from the Weinstein Company. I kept going and did maybe Miramax, and then I did companies around that. I did studios, I did agencies. And then I spoke to women in tech and women in engineering who all had similar stories. And there was sort of these patterns that kept emerging, stories about the boys' club and sort of gendered division of labor and having to get the lunches, and all these kind of stories kept coming up again and again, to the point where the composite felt kind of natural, because it felt like almost every woman's story in a way, as depressing as that sounds. So that's when I committed it to paper, when I had this kind of enough repetition that I felt like, oh, it's no longer one woman's story, it's kind of every woman's story in some way.
And I feel like Julia is really essential to the creation of that, and she is remarkable. And I would love to know a little bit more about your work with her in particular. And so my real question is, how do you get a performer to put so much emotion into something like turning on a blender?
We cast really well. We have a great casting agent, and I had seen her in The Americans, and she has that amazing face. She's so striking, and we needed somebody infinitely watchable, because I knew she was just going to be turning on lights and making coffee for 90 minutes. So that became she was the perfect kind of person to do that, in that you could just watch her do anything. And I think you could watch her read the phone book and you'd be kind of intrigued. So that kind of worked well. And then her and I developed, we had about 3 weeks of pre-production where the character wasn't really scripted. It just said a name and an age. And the two of us kind of developed her together, who she was, what her motivations were, kind of came up with a backstory for her. But that was really I come from documentary, so it's really kind of incredible to work that closely, and that kind of collaboration with an actor was really sort of wonderful and something new for me.
That's wonderful. And I also thought that sound emerges in a lot of ways as a character almost. So I have the idea that a keyboard click can be so menacing, with a slide of that tissue box slide that Matthew McFadden does, and it's so disturbing. So can you talk a little bit also about the sound and the sound editors, who I feel like should be nominated for all of the awards?
Yeah, we had Leslie Schatz, the sound designer, who was incredible. He did Gus Van Sant's Elephant, if you remember that. So really kind of like films that have very little music and lots of soundtrack. So he and I built this soundscape together. It was a lot. He sent people out with microphones to record all over New York City, and helicopters and sirens, and also machinery like buzzing of lights and fluorescent fixtures and computers and fans and everything that goes on in offices. So it was a kind of a big job. It was kind of a silent movie until we added all of that.
And in terms of the exterior, the sounds coming from outside, you really tracked what the sounds from outside would be like through that span of time in sort of the Tribeca area. So it's really, so you hear like the bridge, you hear like the Holland Tunnel sounds a little bit later in the movie. The background ambiences kind of change.
So you can recognize that quotidian aspect too of the everyday. So James and Scott, you have this amazing film and this amazing project, but also one that is controversial. Can you tell us a little bit about was it hard to find support for the film in terms of circulation or, yeah?
Yes. I would say almost 35 years, and we've known each other and have worked together really on both our first feature. My first feature as a producer, and Scott was instrumental in that, which was a little movie we shot over 2 long weekends with the great Raul Ruiz here in New York called The Golden Boat, 16 millimeter, and that was Christine Vachon, who some people know is the great. One of the great producers here, was our first assistant director, and we had this incredible crew. So we go back a ways, and I think we can both say this is the most difficult film we've ever tried to put together in our lives, and I hope that remains the case for the rest of our life. Quite clearly, I think one of the things is it's pretty obvious now that you see it, even though it's a period piece that is, say, it's a little bit before the hashtag #MeToo, mainstream media gave this a certain kind of language, and there was certain a handful of these dudes got taken down, right? So on the one hand it's a period piece, and on the other hand I don't think it'll be a shock to people when you hear that it's pretty much not a period piece in the industry still. So it's not exactly like we were welcome news to most of the people out there who I was trying to sell the movie to. So thus making it's something of a miracle that we have with Bleecker Street actual theatrical distribution, and it may have something to do with the fact that the gentleman who runs Known's Bleecker Street happens to be somebody who I worked with for 13 years when I was running Focus Features, and who I brought up, and eventually when I was fired was and then he was fired too, but was my co-CEO. So it was, but that's kind of, we had to thread a needle. We didn't realize how tiny the thread had to be, but we got there, so we're pretty blessed.
Yeah. There were a number of companies where it would get to a certain stage and it would seem really positive, and then like one person or one more senior person would veto it. And we were, I think it was Labor Day weekend, we were high-fiving each other because we thought we were closed, and then a day later it's like, nope.
I mean, it reminds me of that scene in the HR, which is it's the longest scene in the longest interaction she has, right? I think I clocked it's close to 10 minutes, right? And it feels excruciating in that way. But there's this, when she asks, "What can we do?" And Matthew McFadden is incredible in this scene, but the way in which he's also able to manipulate what she says, and her desires, and a lot of that pins upon, I feel like, class and labor and her own motivation and ambition, and I feel like these are interesting tensions that the film really focuses on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that scene was it was not fun is the wrong word to write, but we were trying to make sure both of them had a kind of coherent argument. Like, he does shoot her down because his job is to protect the company, and she doesn't have enough information for him to realize he can poke holes in it pretty easily. So it became this kind of fight between the two of them, but Matthew's just so good that, like, I don't know, the two of them did it. It's 12 pages and they did it over and over and over. It was felt like a one-act play or something. Yeah. It was really incredible to witness. We played around with that a lot. I feel like, I don't know, do you want to? had some.
Well, no, I mean, these guys know, my working title for the movie was capitalism. So when you talk about class relations and you talk about what young people now are facing when they go into the workplace, which is often, if you've got a 4.1 from Northwestern, is, $60,000 in debt and a very precarious sense of what even being on that ladder to success and whatever it is it's terrifying out there. And very different from when I graduated college and I went to Berkeley, my debt was I think $800, and nobody was we were like, well, maybe I'll get a job or something. It just wasn't. It's just so different now, the anxiety level. So we're really trying to present all of these issues, and of course, #MeToo is the central and the gender dynamics, but this prism of class relations, and even here's somebody from a very privileged starting point, right? But you realize that's just, even that privilege is just almost, is such a de minimis factor in the terror of this lived experience of entering this workforce right now. And that was important for us to depict.
I know that many of you have comments and questions. There are microphones, and we would prefer that you use them just so that everyone can hear. Yes, Marianne.
Thank you. This was utterly gripping and excruciating and fabulous. So there's one element I'm missing in the story, and I don't know this world, and you've interviewed all these people, but where's female friendship? I mean, where are her friends from Northwestern? Where are her neighbors in Astoria? Has she not made any friends that she can talk about this with? And I realized it would have made them film different. She's trying to talk to her mother, but I just somehow don't find that part of it realistic.
Yeah, that's interesting. I spoke to a lot of people who felt very isolated in that she's working such long hours that you often lose some friendships in that kind of in your struggle to maintain the kind of grueling schedule. But I also feel like, from my own experience, when I was starting out, I kind of abandoned my friends to concentrate on work, and then I would call my mother crying at lunch break. So that's kind of came from, it's funny, Julia and I have a similar, Julia who plays the character, we had one young girl at the screening who sort of said, we're her friends, she's not cool at all. And we were like, and Julia were like, yeah, we're not that cool, maybe, because that's sort of reflective of our lives.
It's utterly realistic. It's 100% realistic. It's crazy, and I've seen this again and again. Even people coming to work when I was running a company, they get that entry level job, and even if you're saying, hey, have a life, you need it, whatever, they're going to just work 14, 15, 16, 17 hours a day. They're going to read scripts over the weekend. They're going to untether every tie they had to that incredible group of friends they graduated from college with, wherever they graduated from, as they're thrown into this. They're going to be sleepless, and they're going to be in a situation where they know they're on probation, and so that they have when they enter that workspace, they have no friends there yet. And the only friendships they start to develop usually is on these message boards. So they're digital. They get into these groups, and even there you're terrified that if you misstep or tell something to the group that shouldn't be told, you'll be excised. And the interesting thing that I found, and it really became true, was even when I would say, okay, I'm an assistant's moving on to getting promoted to another job, so I need a new assistant. Who actually hires the next assistant, even for a CEO? It's the other assistants. It's them, because they're the ones who are going to sort through all the resumes first that are coming through HR or whatever, and give you the 5, because you don't have time to read 400 resumes, right? So there's this absolute terror of the surveillance at the entry level from around the office, and a sense that this new person and that kind of hazing and all that stuff, and even in a friendly environment, it's just part of the structure. So it's a strange thing, but it's actually, I think it's incredibly real to me now that I've talked, especially now that we've talked to so many of these folks and getting the feedback in.
I thought it was really interesting that you used someone who wasn't directly themselves abused, and how effective that was, that sort of even less power position. Was that always the plan, to have it be a sort of secondary, an observer of what was going on rather than the actual victim of what was going on?
Yeah, I had seen kind of the coverage of Me Too. Like, there's a few things, but I was a film director for 10 years, like on the film festival circuit, and I don't look like a film director. And I was just like, I got very tired of the way people were treating me and the questions I got asked at Q&As, and I was thinking, there is this problem, which is misconduct, which is horrible, which I've witnessed and experienced as well. But there's also this larger problem, which is if we're not going to even let women into the film industry or take them seriously in it, nothing's going to change. So partly I thought we've got to kind of fix both things at once. So rather than focusing on the big bad men and the assault, let's focus on kind of these broader kind of structural, systemic, and cultural problems about getting women basically into the industry. So that became the focus. So yeah, that was kind of the idea moving forward, and that's where it sort of sprung from.
Hi, I noticed at the beginning of the film when she drove up to the office building, American Psycho was playing in one of the windows behind her. And I understand that was
Oh, is that American Psycho? I didn't know what was playing. Oh, really?
You didn't?
No, I mean, that
I
was
thought
just
it
a
was
guy watching that.
intentional
He's a
choice. Okay, my
comic.
question
Yeah,
was about the motivation and the illusions, like the sociopathy. Like,
Oh,
no,
damn.
don't go there.
Oh, we'll have to clear
You should
that.
take credit for it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Definitely take credit for it.
Yeah, creative choice.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's a great choice. Hi. Okay, so at the end there are two very strong moments with the assistant, and the one is she gets this praise over the phone about being smart, and then it's juxtaposed with her, you know, on the phone with her dad, being lonely and seeing what she's been, you know, worried about the whole film and having this anxiety over, and then she walks away. And so in the vein of, you know, this isn't just about, you know, the men, what sort of sense, what is the assistant representing in terms of, you know, complicit, like women being complicit? You know, she has this moment in the bathroom and she doesn't say anything, you know, she doesn't speak to any other females or males really. So I guess the assistant, in terms of all of the, you know, stories that you told, what would you say?
I mean, it's difficult to talk about her level of complicity because I get into trouble. But like, this is like a system, as we've discussed a lot, that pushes people into a position of victimization, where they're kind of forced into a position of complicity and kind of beaten down. And it's so dehumanizing in this kind of work and the position she's in, that by the end of it, she's kind of has to make a choice. Do I keep going? And everything is, there doesn't seem to be any way out, and it seems to be an accepted mode of behavior. So I feel like it's a really, really complex position she's in, and so it's really difficult for us to judge. And I was trying not to, I mean, the film is kind of without judgment, I hope, in some sense, in that we're sort of on her side and we're seeing kind of every kind of, it's death by 1,000 cuts, you know, and you sort of witness all of them, like including literal paper cuts, to the point where she's kind of, yeah, I guess forced into that position. So yeah, I think it's difficult. It's tough to talk about.
It's so easy because we tweet that complicit, not complicit. You know, this kind of A/B digital switch, and I think one of the things that was born out of the process by which, Kitty, you led us to help make the film, is that, you know, the film as an experience, you're going to experience this person's life for a day, and completely centered on this person, right? It neither judges nor absolves, but really makes you live that experience. So you're connected, and you are, you know, that you are connected. And I think for us to begin a process to try to figure out a way in which that person, we could imagine that person actually comfortably having friends or colleagues to talk about this, comfortably being empowered to make the change that we need to make to keep the next Weinsteins or the current ones that just aren't on jail, you know, on trial right now from happening. You actually have to at least acknowledge the existence of that experience and feel a part of it. And then you can start that process. So I think the film does hold in abeyance an audience position that would allow us to easily make a judgment. And I hope that's a correct decision.
And I think it's important that there's no triumphant narrative, that and it's not just her, that there are many people who are aware of what is going on, and that's part of the layering it, and all of them have made similar decisions or have found themselves in positions that one could imagine. And I don't want to let go too of the James reminding us of the pre-Me Too timeline of it, and I think it's very important that there are so many phones out so many times, and people are typing on them. You hear them, you hear them texting or doing whatever on the phone, but that is so there's a visual reminder of that the potentiality of what could happen, but that doesn't arise in this particular moment of the film.
I just have a really quick question, which is I've forgotten who told her she was safe because she wasn't his type. What? Yeah. What was?
Yeah,
You're just talking to it, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just wondering what the thought was into coming up with that idea, because in a way it made her safe.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons behind. I mean, firstly, I got told that a lot of the assistants had that role, were given that job because they weren't his type. I mean, if they were, the other assistants wouldn't employ them because they would think that's what's going to happen to her. So the women would get employed if they were kind of a little bit some odd looking or something. That would be part of the criteria, which is bizarre. But also, we were conscious, we didn't want to make a film where you're waiting for her to be grabbed and assaulted. We wanted to make sure she sat outside of that and she could be an observer, as opposed to every time you see someone come up behind her, you're like, oh, what's gonna, that wasn't kind of the thriller we were trying to make. So, I mean, there was a few reasons, but yeah, that not his type phrase came up again and again and again in the Me Too coverage. And so I guess we would just we stole it from the headlines.
I think it's so powerful and so amazing. And what I found so interesting is in those situations, and I've been in situations like that, in institutions where everyone in the place, like everybody knows what's going on, and everybody is adjusting their behavior and their consciousness and their morality to a situation that they know is messed up, but everyone is trying to make that adjustment, and the whole place is sick. It's like this illness, and I really felt like it felt very strong. Like even all those guys, as adolescent as they were, they knew that too, that the whole thing is inappropriate and wrong, but yet everything's pivoting around this kind of, at the core, this kind of illness at the core. So I thought it's just a brilliant job of that.
No, thank you so much. I think I remember Scott on the first day of shooting said to me, wow, they're so young.
So young.
Like you cast them and you read it on a piece of paper and you see these boys come in and joke around about, it's like, wow, it's a lot of responsibility for some young kids who I think are still figuring their own lives out. But also, I mean, what was I going to say? I had something to say about that. Sorry, I've been doing press all day and I've been saying that I'm turned into a robot, and so my brain just fails at this point. You speak. One second, I'll go gather my thoughts.
No, I agree very much with what you said. So,
what
and
I
then
would
there's
say-
layers of denial. I mean, people
Yeah.
are allowing themselves to be in denial,
And also, I
or
would
making the choice to be in denial.
consent is an interesting thing because I think a lot of people didn't assume that what was going on was consensual, and the idea, and not knowing what's going on behind that door, and you're allowed to kind of, I guess you trick yourself into thinking it's consensual. Oh, these women, a lot of them say, kind of roll their eyes and say like sluts, coming into this office. What do they expect? Like you get a lot of that. So I think people would judge. There'd be different ways people would kind of find, like, I don't know, different kind of methods to not have to deal with exactly what's going on behind there, and maybe trick yourself into thinking it was okay or consensual or advised. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, it's very messy.
Yes.
Hi. I actually have a couple questions, but I guess the most important one is, did you always know that you weren't going to actually show the bosses? Like he wasn't actually going to be in any of the scenes except for the one at the end. Yeah, just your decision process behind that, of him having such a powerful effect, even though we never actually physically see him.
Yeah, it was originally, he wasn't in the script at all, and the reasoning was firstly that I thought that bad men had enough screen time, and it was enough of those films, and the second sort of well, I guess I was sort of what I was trying to do was just make sure we centered women in the narrative and made it her story, and given the film to the woman with the least power in the office, the youngest woman on the desk of a predatory executive was kind of the original pitch. And we weren't going to include his voice. In fact, I didn't want any kind of anything of him. We needed to show his power over her, so we did need to have bits and pieces like phone calls and emails. But the voice came because I think I was shooting it in a wide shot, these phone calls, and then I realized exactly what Julia's face was doing and realized, oh no, we have to be right in there for these phone calls. And when you're right in there and you can't hear what's coming out the other side of the phone, it's weird. So we actually cast the actor that plays the voice in post-production, and he came in and we wrote a bunch of different things, and he's a great actor, J.O. Sanders.
Sanders, yeah.
His name is just brilliant. And he's phenomenal. So he kind of was like, oh, I know this guy. I know exactly who this is. And kind of just improv, like we was kind of crazy what he was doing. It was terrifying. I was in a booth listening, and he came out afterwards and was like, do you want a hug? And I was like, no. He's a lovely guy, but it was just terrifying what could come out of it. So yeah, it was something that we built in. But I think you needed it. You needed to sense how threatening he was, how in control he was of this entire kind of system and machine. So it was sort of an essential element.
I just wanted to add one thing. That whole thing about don't worry, you're not his type is kind of a way for the guy in that position to say, what are you worried about? It's not going to affect you. We don't worry about it. As men, it's not our responsibility. It's a way of relinquishing any responsibility. So she doesn't have to be responsible because she's not going to be directly affected, just like they're not responsible because they're never directly affected.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Great point.
That is the perfect transition, because I would like to ask you about the New York Foundation of Women Partnership, because this question, what can we do? And one of the brilliant things about the film, I think, is it really complicates the question of solidarity and what can we do in ways that remind me of Me Too as a movement has been fracturing and difficult and complicated in a number of ways related to critiques by women of color, or, that this is something that is important to remember, I think. So I think it's in part quite brilliant that there is no all the women of the office rise up together moment. But I think it's useful for people to know about the partnership that you all have created with the New York Women's Foundation.
Oh no,
we knew we needed a partner as part of the process. I mean, from the very beginning, the process has been ingrained in Kitty's research, which then, in a sense, started to create this sense of community that would be behind it. But then, with us it was a long process to figure out who to work with. And New York Women's Foundation, which is so great because they've been supporting Me Too before the hashtag was a Hollywood and kind of white-ish hashtag. They supported Tarana Burke and mainly women-led organizations of color. So, and to a certain extent, the analysis that drives the images that you see of these extraordinarily white environments, because, to be honest, the misogyny is one thing, but the racism is like legit in these spaces, right? And I was talking to the reporter for The Spectator before the screening about this. And it's hard to image these spaces without reproducing precisely that kind of whiteness of the culture that's just reproducing all of this stuff again and again. So, that said, we actually are a Screen Actors Guild diversity film, but these are a lot of diverse actors playing white people. So they're invisible again. It's a weird thing. And it was also because we couldn't actually cast specifically people of color in many places because there was only one of that person who ever worked at these companies for so long, they would know who they were. Right. It would be a weird thing. So it was this weird bind, and we're still, you have to think about it, negotiate it, and there's no perfect answer to these things. But all of that said is that I think the analysis that went into the imaging of this white space is an analysis that decenters precisely, or hopes to decenter the whiteness of them. But you're in a weird, it's weird when you're making movies and these are the images that you're producing, right? Yeah.
And you are donating a percentage of profits.
Yeah, 10% of the profits of the film go to the New York Women's Foundation.
I'll just jump line in real quick. Sure. So Jeffrey was there, London or Cannes, there's that line. Are we meant to understand that to be Jeffrey Epstein?
No comment. I think that was thrown around. We had a lot of lines that we had actors in a booth and we were like, talk about Cannes, and people would just kind of, spitball, and you end up with Jeffrey was there on a yacht. I don't know.
Alan, Jeffrey.
So first, thank you. I thought this was just extraordinary, absolutely gripping, as someone said. And it's hard for me to think of another film that so beautifully captures the operations of social power and the production of social domination, the multiple layers of power and interactions of power. So the boys who share the office with her, who abuse her and exercise power over her, and that are being brutalized by other men in the system. It's just extraordinary. I wanted to ask you particularly about what you intended to do with the woman from Idaho, who is a key figure who runs through. And what I was most struck by was the last scene where she's in the office, and you sort of get a sense that she's being primed to take the place of the assistant, and then maybe wonder, no, maybe she's just being allowed to have this fantasy for a couple of days more so he can screw her a few more times in the hotel before abandoning her, because she's never going to have this job. But what I loved about it was it seemed to make us complicit in the evaluation. She's young, she's beautiful, she's working class background, she couldn't possibly be competent, but maybe she is. It sort of echoes what the HR guy says to her. Anyway, just the complexity of that scene was extraordinary for me, and I wonder if you could just talk about it a little bit.
It's funny, I was aware of that when we were writing it and of that dynamic. We brought her in because a lot of people spoke about this kind of complex situation where someone comes in and is given, you have to give them a desk and a phone and teach them, and you're like, are you here to stay? Like, what is your role? And then you feel horrible because you're judging them, but like, it's really complicated. And on the page, I was kind of enjoying kind of playing with all that. And then we cast Christine, and she's so amazing. Like, we were casting her for a while. We had all these girls who looked kind of sexy in a way, that wore their sexuality kind of on their sleeve, kind of very overtly sexual. And then we got Christine's tape, and it was just so heartbreaking to see. She's got such like deer in the headlights kind of thing, like, and it just added a whole other layer. And watching her and Julia, even on the set together, try and figure each other out, because Julia's like traditionally this gorgeous movie star, but you put her next to Christine and all of a sudden she's a little less like attractive or something, like she feels insecure. So that dynamic became fascinating, and everything that came out of their mouths just kind of seemed to be so much more powerful than just on the page. And I think a lot of that is casting, and just that girl Christine was just incredible. So I mean,
No, to me, one of the most chilling moments in the movie is, basically when she comes back to the office after the afternoon, it's like, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. And you're like,
It's like my favorite dialogue in the movie is, you okay? And she goes, I can't figure out how to dial out. 991 to dial out.
it kills me.
yeah, but it is complicated, and even judging her for being a waitress, the way that Matthew spins that back on her, it's like, oh, why? Because she's a waitress? Is that why? Like all of that. It's really kind of, I don't know. That we had a good time putting that together. As awful as that sounds.
So I really enjoyed it and how complex it was, but I was really curious about like the psychological aspect of it. Throughout the movie, it seemed like she was sort of at her breaking point, or at least like sort of getting there. And I assumed she was going to kind of snap, which is why she probably went to HR. But then everything kind of changed. I'm just curious about like the ending, in the sense there's no closure or conclusion. Why did you guys go that route? Because to me, it does seem like she really is getting to her breaking point, and I'm just like, I can't imagine her constantly going through this, and she's only been there for like 2 months, I think. So just like that psychological aspect of kind of wanting to snap, but at the same time just like not really snapping.
Yeah, I spoke to a lot of people who just stayed in those positions for months and months, sometimes years, and just hated themselves and just kept going. And it just was heartbreaking to hear those stories. And a lot of the people I spoke to are no longer in the film industry. Like I met them in weird states in the middle of nowhere, and they'd be, feeding goats or doing something weird, like just so far removed, and just couldn't handle being in the industry. And I was thinking, gosh, well, this is why we don't have enough women in the film industry, because we're not even getting them above assistant level because we're treating them so badly. So that part of that was, what I was interested in exploring. How was this able to go on for so long? How do we have a system that hurt and sidelined so many women for so many years and just kept doing it until 2 years ago, when it finally burst open? It's still not fixed. So yeah, I guess it was. I didn't really want to let anyone off the hook. I felt like we have to sit in that. I'm gonna make everyone miserable. I'm sorry, but that was the thing.
I think it's worth also pointing out that as you're showing 24 hours in the life of an assistant in the film industry, but you used the word quotidian before, and it does, a lot of it is very mundane, what she does, and, I'm sure a lot of women here and men as well can speak, I had in the publishing industry, but it was the same kind of stuff. You are, somebody used the word, you're a waitress. You're a waitress, you're an assistant, she's at the bottom of the totem pole with the two guys who, it's just, that's what, that life is like. Even if you take the whole sort of Me Too, sexual, that whole thing out of it, I think the portrayal of that's what that life is like, and it doesn't matter whether it was 2005 or 2020. And I think the film showed that incredibly well also.
Yeah.
The universality of it, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was the banality of evil.
The banality of it, yeah.
Well, it's that I hope that one of the things that the film is saying, precisely to your question, which is this, the 3-act structure of the narrative that is built into these experiences, and we impose it, we expect it, but we also here allow it to happen in a way, but we're still not there at the end. And I think the reason is that we want to say, look, the violence is the structure, right? It is the day-to-day, that is violence. And so that sense that it's going to be repeated because it's just the structure. It doesn't have a narrative. It's just on repeat, right? And that's a kind of violence that's very hard to narrate. It's very hard to tell in the forms that we use to tell these stories. And so it's very easy to try to come up with conclusions or hopeful this or action of some kind, but that actually doesn't reflect the reality of the violence itself, which is the part of the violence is its repeatability.
I have a question. I was really curious about the scene with the nanny and the children. I will say that was, I love the film, but I thought that was the one scene that didn't quite ring true. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
Why didn't it ring true?
Couple things. I thought that it was very weird that the nanny would come to the office with the children at that level. As she was in the publishing industry, I was in the media industry, and I have felt very much like that, like Julia. But I would never expect a person at that level to have his children come in with a nanny.
Surprisingly, a lot of people told me that happened. Yeah.
That's interesting.
They would have to play games with the children, and they would be forced to, as women, be forced to be the ones that look after the women and do that with the children. And the boys would be fine. The boys would be back to work, and they'd be stuck doing, making horse noises in the green room. So that is honestly a story from a lot of people that I spoke to. So yeah.
I think it's also related to labor and women's labor and caregiving. This is on you. But caregiving as essential to this patriarchal structure. Ron.
I can speak up. I just wanted to add one other touch that you put in the film, which I thought was really smart and very painful, when the father says, "You're so lucky to have this job. We're so proud of you." And that's also part of the complexity that she's kind of caught in. She knows that she's got this great opportunity, and 400 other women are applying for it. And so it feeds the hopper, You know,
Yeah.
even the parents from the outside, we're proud of our students who are doing this, you know, and we say that. Oh, you've got a good opportunity, stay with it.
Yeah. Yeah, a few people have said to me, wow, the father was complicit as well. You know, like the idea that everyone is part of the structure that keeps her in that job. And where do you begin with your dad trying to explain that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so all of that was, yeah, kind of important to me.
I think the term comfort food plays a role here too. I mean, she's eating between after every tense scene, there's a break while she's eating. It's almost like the dump in Law and Order to give you a break and to give her a break and to give us a break. And I think it's really kind of a brilliant way to do that. And the second point, I actually got a little ambiguous about who the title of the play of the show is referring to. And, who's the assistant that we're talking about? And I almost wonder, maybe it should have been plural, the assistants, because, both assistants are important characters here.
Yeah, I think so those two boys are assistants. So and plus the new girl, there's probably four assistants in there, you're right. I mean, I worked at the ABC, like the Australian BBC, and I was an assistant there. And I clearly remember what I ate at every lunch break, because it was the highlight of my day. It was going to get like a sausage roll. Do you even have that in this country? At the local bakery at lunchtime was kind of my thing. And so yeah, that was important to me, that part of the day.
Last question.
Actually, talking about the children, the daughter, I thought that was actually kind of genius, having her seem like sexualized and sort of like she's like picking up on what her father is doing. It's like she wants to be an actress and she's stuck. So it's like she's not part of it, but she's picking up on the tension between like the nanny and her father. She knows. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So I wanted to hear what your take was on choosing to not have a lot of dialogue. So whether it be muted through telephone calls where you can't always distinguish what they're saying, or literally just not being dialogue and just the noises of an office. And still within that, there's like I don't know if it was intentional or not, but a very like piercing, high-pitched tone anytime she enters his office. So how did you go about sort of maneuvering these scenes where there wasn't a lot of words to sort of play off on, and how were you conveying those messages?
Well, it was a film about the work always, and so it was task by task, and I started with maybe 40 tasks, and that became like one of them was photocopying, and one of them was getting water out of the cupboard, and like almost like I had to then write the screenplay, just like order them basically in a way that wasn't too sensational. Like I wanted to make sure there was, for every one strange or disconcerting thing that she had to do, there was 6 other kind of everyday, kind of banal duties. So I wanted to have equal weight, because I mean, that's her day. She photocopies, but she also picks an earring up off the floor. And this idea that she's an enabler and just how complicit is she became, like, it was very important to me that we were kind of, structuring it in a way that gave the same weight to the banal, boring photocopying tasks as to the kind of more scandalous kind of things. So, I mean, dialogue wasn't really essential, and I never really thought about it. I think that script was so short, though, that I think you were a little worried when I sent it to you. Scott was fine, I'm worried about James.
I was worried.
Okay, cool. I mean, yeah, so it was a very short script that had just sort of
It was longer than Lost in Translation, remember?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I think it was shorter, but it was longer than, what's that other one with the...
Somewhere.
Somewhere, it's
Yes.
longer than, so I pride myself on being longer than one of Sophia Coppola's scripts. But yeah, so it is a very short script, and it wasn't very descriptive. So it's funny, a few people were at the screening last night who'd read the script and were just like, wow, it's a very different film when you actually watch it played out, because it's just visually, like, what it's doing, and the sound and everything pulls you into it in a way that the script never did.
But it's also true that because of that, the most micro level, a piece of dialogue that in any other script would read as background action, here is, we've talked to so many young people who've been in these assistant jobs, who've now seen the film and, early screening from Telluride elsewhere, and there's lines that really resonate with them that you would think were tossed off, like, I ordered chicken, this is turkey. And that, in terms of this pecking order, but there should be peers and friends, but in fact, it's just a cut to like, I am going to die, right? That line weirdly is like terrifying to a certain part of our audience, right? And I think that's how allowing that ambience. And the other last thing I'd say is we were reading now some these initial reviews, and it's been great, obviously, to get that confirmation. But some of them are saying things that we didn't even like. You said the ASMR, right?
Right. Well, yeah, that's come up in Leslie Schatz's sound design. People, like one review said, the choice to incorporate ASMR in this film, and they came up in another review as well.
So that people are having, for those of some of the older folks might not get the reference, but there is a kind of ambient sound patterning that is a lot of our audience appears to be receiving physically, somatically, in ways that are really interesting. I mean, it's really, it's pretty intense. And then I think it was part of the process that led to that.
But it's interesting. There's a lot of background dialogue that just comes in and out. And in the beginning, when we had screenings where we didn't have the dialogue in, some people said, "Oh, doesn't feel enough like the film business." And then there's that layer of just like businessy talk and talk about festivals and box office grosses and words.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, Jeffrey. And words come in and out. But it does create that atmosphere. It's a challenge for us on the foreign versions, actually, of like how much to subtitle and not. But there's actually quite a lot in the background that creates the environment of the film office.
They need to get to the Lincoln Center, so please join me in thanking